It's with us is David Rifkin, a lawyer who served both President Reagan and George Bush Sr. And we're joined also by Zainab Chowdhury from the Council on American-Islamic Relations, one of the organisations to file a legal challenge to that executive order. Thanks both of you for being with us. David, to you first of all. I mean, Donald Trump is clearly frustrated. Is he right to be frustrated? Are the courts thwarting him?
Well, he obviously uses a fairly unique vernacular to express his frustration, and I think it resonates well with some people and not so well with others. He is not a politician. So leaving that aside, I think substantively he has a right to be frustrated. The decision by Judge Robart is completely indefensible, both as a matter of statutory interpretation of the Immigration Naturalization Act, as well as a matter of constitutional interpretation. My prediction is that this case will die. Ultimately, the wisdom of this kind, and I would not call it, as many people do, Muslim ban. It's a suspension of refugee and tourist admissions from several countries because of unsettled security situation there and the difficulty of having high-quality vetting. Well, ultimately, this should be resolved through political channels, as it should be in a democracy. This is not an issue for adjudication by the courts.
I'll come back to some of those points you made towards the end of that answer, but Zainab Chowdhury, in terms of the rhetoric, first of all, when the President calls this man a so-called judge, a ridiculous judgment, Judge Robart would be responsible for any terrorist attack in the future. What do you make of a president talking like that?
I think it's very dangerous. I think anytime the leader of the free world, the President of the United States, makes a comment that undermines the justice system or any representative within the justice system, sends a message to the world and to his constituents, most importantly, that he is not serious about placing his faith in the justice system. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals clearly made a decision over the weekend to deny the request of the Justice Department to overturn the restraining order, the temporary restraining order that was granted against the Muslim ban. And this is evidence of the fact that we have a government that operates on a system of checks and balances. No one individual should have the authority to make the decision, even though the president is granted leeway in terms of making the decision on who enters the country and who does not enter the country. No one individual should have the sole unilateral decision-making power to be able to determine which group of individuals enters the country. And I think the justice system is sending a clear clear message to the president that he has to abide by the laws and abide by the process, and calling out a judge for making a decision that is not in his favor I think it shows a level of immaturity that is not befitting to the President of the United States.
Let me go back to David. I imagine that you worked for two former presidents. I mean, isn't it incredibly dangerous almost to suggest that this judge is somehow un-American because he's interpreted the law that way?
Well, I've not seen any reference of a judge being un-American, but look, let's all take a chill pill, to use a colloquial expression. President Obama has been quite vitriolic in his criticism, for example, of the judicial decisions at both district court level and 11th Circuit level involving challenge to Obamacare. I know very well because I was the outside counsel for the 27 states that challenged it. So he didn't use quite the same terms, but he used quite bold terms. Our system, our constitutional system, our political system is quite resilient. Just because a politician or two or three say something negative about a judge or judges or justices is not at all dangerous opinion.
Well, it's not just saying something negative. He's saying that he would be responsible if there was a future terrorist attack. Let me pick up on something you said about the Muslim ban, because these legal challenges are on twin basis about whether people have travelled on valid documents, but also alleging the violation of freedom of religion by appearing to target Muslims. Now, it was targeting Muslims, wasn't it, when Rudy Giuliani says he had a conversation with the President and the President said to him, I want a Muslim ban, you tell me how to make it legal. There can be no doubt, can there?
Forgive me, that's not how things work. I understand exactly what you're saying, that if you look behind the language of this executive order, that is not, for the benefit of your viewers, is not a ban on Muslims, because there are 50-plus countries that have Muslim majority, and the ban is imposed on 7 countries. Number one. Number two, it's imposed on everybody coming from those countries, irrespective of their nationality. But the argument used by the critics is, well, because President Trump made some remarks during the campaign about ban on Muslims, that's what we're going to, in effect, deconstruct this executive order. That's not how things work in our constitutional system. You're not supposed to look behind the action, the specific action, be it a regulation, executive order, you're challenging and try to divine the mindset of a people who wrote it. That is fundamentally wrong.
Let me bring in Zainab, because I know she's trying to get in. I mean, Donald Trump has said it's not a Muslim ban. He's also said it's not a ban. Do you think it is both a ban and a Muslim ban?
You know, your guest makes a great point that there are 50 Muslim majority countries that are not listed on that executive order. But one thing we have to keep in mind is that the 7 countries that are listed on that executive order are Muslim majority countries. And there has been an exception granted for religious minorities within those countries that are Muslim majority countries that would not be Muslim. So the majority of the immigrants and the refugees that are targeted by this particular ban are Muslim. Whether we frame it, you know, it's a game of semantics. We can take a chill pill and we can frame it differently, and we could say, oh, it's not a Muslim ban, and, you know, package up pretty in a way that's more appeasing, that seems to be more constitutionally sound. But at the end of the day, we know that on the campaign trail, Mr. Trump made a clear pledge that he was going to call for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. And from anyone who's looking at this situation objectively, who looks at the language of the executive order, who sees the communities that are impacted by that language, I mean, it's hard not to imagine that this is not a phase one of that implementation of calling for a complete and total shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Briefly on this point, Zainab, is it not quite within the scope of presidential powers to be the person that decides who comes into the United States and who does not?
It is absolutely within the president's powers, and that's something that I think there has to be a system of checks and balances. Anytime a president makes a decision that clearly marginalizes any community based on their race, religion, sexual orientation, what have you, ethnicity, that's a clear violation of some of the core fundamental rights that are enshrined within the Constitution. And
David, is this one going all the way to the Supreme Court, do you think?
Yes, it would go to the Supreme Court undoubtedly. I believe administration would prevail in the Ninth Circuit. And again, benefit of your viewers, the Ninth Circuit has not delivered some smashing defeat to the administration. All they've said is we're not going to give you an emergency stay of a temporary restraining order. Your viewers should know that temporary restraining order lasts 14 days. So unless the Ninth Circuit renews it, is going to die on its own weight. I have every confidence that this case would lose in the Ninth Circuit, and then, of course, the challengers, the plaintiffs would take it up to the Supreme Court. But look, there's a lot of loose, I'm a constitutional lawyer, there's a lot of loose talk about, you know, hurting communities, et cetera, et cetera. I hate to sound heartless, but aside from the fact that it's not banned on Muslims, the President of the United States has both constitutional authority and statutory authority to exclude any class of aliens from coming here, either as visitors or refugees. Okay, there's no constitutional right or statutory right for anybody who is an alien to come to this country. It's just silly to argue otherwise.
The briefest of final points to both of you. David, to you first of all. Perhaps what we're seeing in this court, this tangle, is it a harsh lesson for Trump that actually you cannot just make sweeping judgments and then for it to be delivered? It is a lot more difficult. It is fundamentally rooted in the Constitution, and actually some of his plans may not be as easy as he thinks to actually implement.
I think everybody understands that we have a rule of law, and pretty much any executive action, regulation, executive order can be challenged. To the extent those challenges succeed a little bit, particularly at the trial level, I guess the opponents can cheer and rejoice. Those challenges are going to fail as you go up through the judicial system, and at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to matter that much. Incidentally, I will tell you that most of President Obama's executive orders and regulations went down in flames as well.
Zainab, very briefly, do you expect this executive order to be modified, and if actually Trump wins, the consequences of it, do you think?
You know, I think the American people have spoken, and the nation is very divided. We saw the outpouring of support, people, you know, going to airports from coast to coast, protesting the Muslim ban. And this is essentially what we're going to call it, because the communities that are impacted are vastly majority Muslim. That's not to say that, you know, the president does not have the right to determine which aliens enter into the country or not. American citizens are also being impacted. We've been receiving reports of Americans from many of those countries who are naturalized citizens of the United States, who are legal permanent residents, who are here on legal visas, who are being impacted because of the controversy and the confusion that has erupted because of this ban. I mean, with the stroke of a pen, people's lives have changed. We heard from a man from Iran who was not able to travel abroad to attend his mother's funeral because of the ban and the consequences of the ban. And these are very real impacts that this is having on people's lives. And I think that as the president for all Americans, the president has a responsibility to not implement legislation or executive orders that